Hey, Wide Awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories. It started with her profile saying she was a cafe manager. Nothing flashy, just a few photos of her smiling behind a counter, one of her with a latte art heart, and another of the place itself. The vibe looked warm and quiet, the kind of spot people go to for peace more than coffee. I remember thinking it was nice meeting someone who wasn't trying to show off at bars or clubs. She told me her name was Amber. She said she'd been working there for a few years, managing it part-time while studying design. I didn't think twice about it. We talked for a week before she suggested we meet. She said she could open up the cafe early before her shift, so we had the place to ourselves. She made it sound kind of special, like this quiet morning date idea was her thing. She kept saying how it would be cozy, just us, and the sound of the coffee machine. It sounded peaceful, so I agreed. I woke up early that day around 6 a.m., and the streets were still empty. I remember it was cold enough for my hands to sting, and the air had that early morning smell like wet pavement and exhaust. The cafe was in this quiet area, not far from the city center but still tucked away. The windows had little hand-drawn chalk signs on them. One of them said "Good Vibes Only," and another listed seasonal drinks. The lights were off, except one faint glow near the counter. She waved at me from inside like she had been waiting. I remember thinking that was kind of sweet. When I walked in, the smell of old coffee and cleaning spray hit me. It wasn't unpleasant, but something about it felt off. She was wearing this oversized beige sweater and had her hair tied up messily, like she had just woken up too. She said she wanted to make me something off menu. I didn't question it. She moved around the counter like she knew where everything was: cups, filters, even the milk frother. I sat by the window watching her. It looked like she had done this 100 times before, though something about how she moved was strange. Every time she grabbed something, she hesitated a second before finding it. I figured maybe she was just tired or nervous. We talked while she worked the espresso machine. She told me about her college classes, about how early mornings were her favorite time to think. She asked me about work, family, all the usual stuff. But then she started asking about weird things like whether I lived alone, or if anyone knew I was meeting her that early. I laughed it off at first, but the questions kept coming. I said something like, "Yeah, people knew," and she nodded without saying much back. Then she asked if I wanted to try the muffins they bake fresh every morning. I didn't see any in the display case, but she pulled out a small tray from behind the counter. They looked old, like a few days old. Still, I took one to be polite. She sat down across from me, not eating anything herself. She kept tapping her fingers on the table like she was waiting for something. At one point, I looked around and noticed the door blinds weren't pulled down properly. There was still tape around the edges of the window like they'd been painted recently. I asked when the cafe usually opened, and she just shrugged, said something like, "Whenever I decide to." I remember smiling awkwardly and checking my phone. No signal inside. Maybe 10 minutes later, she got up suddenly. She said she forgot something in the back and disappeared through a door near the espresso machine. I sat there alone, staring at my untouched coffee. The milk had started forming a skin on top. Then I heard noises from the back, like a door slamming and metal clattering. I stood up, walked toward the counter to see if she was okay, and that's when I heard tires screeching outside. 2 police cars pulled up fast. For a second, I thought maybe there'd been an accident nearby, but before I could even move, the door burst open and 3 officers ran in shouting. One of them told me to step back with my hands up. I froze, trying to explain I was just there on a date, but they didn't care. They rushed toward the back room. A few seconds later, they dragged her out. She was crying, yelling that she didn't do anything. One of the officers told me to stay where I was. The whole cafe was filled with noise, radios, footsteps, her voice echoing. I stood there like an idiot, still holding the muffin. When they finally let me talk, one officer explained that the cafe wasn't open yet and that the girl wasn't an employee. The real manager had reported a break-in attempt earlier that week after a spare key went missing. They'd been watching the place, waiting for someone to try using it again. I guess that morning was her moment. They said she had been using dating apps to invite people there so it looked less suspicious if anyone saw movement inside. I had no idea what to say. They took my statement, asked me how long I'd known her, how we'd met, and what she told me. I told them everything, even how she seemed to know where stuff was. One officer said that was because she had been in before, maybe after closing, figuring out the layout. When they took her away, she looked straight at me, eyes completely blank. Not angry, not sorry, just blank. They cuffed her and led her out into the cold street while the sky was still gray. I stayed behind while one of the officers called the real cafe owner. The guy showed up half an hour later, looking exhausted and confused. He said she had applied for a job there months ago, but never got it. He recognized her immediately. He said the key she used must have been from the old staff set that went missing during renovations. I didn't even know what to say to him. They told me I could leave after that, but I didn't move for a while. The whole place looked smaller once the lights came fully on. The chairs stacked in the corner, the coffee stains on the floor. Everything looked off now that I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. When I finally stepped outside, the sun was just starting to come up. The street looked completely normal again, like nothing had happened. I walked back to my car, still thinking about how calm she looked before the police came in, like she was waiting for it. I deleted Hinge that night, not because I was scared of dating apps, but because I realized how easy it was to believe something when every small detail looks right. The photos, the tone, the timing, all of it can feel real until it's not. It started on a Wednesday night, one of those boring midweeks where I was just scrolling without thinking. I matched with this guy named Marcus on Hinge. He looked harmless, kind of quiet, into art and architecture. His pictures were normal, one in front of a mural, one of him sketching by the river, and another of him holding a coffee. The way he wrote was different too. Not flirty, not weird, just calm. He said he painted in his spare time and showed me a few of his sketches. They were actually good. That's probably what made me say yes when he invited me over to see his work in person. He lived near the edge of the city in this building that looked old but clean, the kind of place where artists actually live. He told me to come around 7 since the lighting was best then. I remember thinking that was such an artist thing to say. When I got there, the sky was turning pink and blue, and the streets were almost empty. I messaged him that I was outside, and he buzzed me in instantly. The hallway smelled like paint thinner and something metallic, like pipes. His door was the last one on the left, and it was slightly open. When I pushed it, I noticed he was already standing there, smiling like he'd been waiting. The place was nothing like I expected. It wasn't messy like most art studios I'd seen online. Everything was weirdly organized, brushes lined up by size, shelves labeled, and canvases stacked neatly against the walls. He offered me water and said to make myself comfortable while he showed me his work. He had a huge painting set up on an easel, half finished. It was of a woman standing under a streetlight, her face blurred out. I asked if it was from memory, and he said he liked painting moments that disappear. I remember those exact words because they sounded rehearsed. After a few minutes, I noticed something strange about the paintings stacked in the corner. They were all portraits of women, but none of them had faces. Some had their faces scratched out, others just blank white circles. I asked him if that was his style, and he said he didn't like finishing them because it made them feel too real. He smiled again after that, but it felt forced, like he was trying to watch how I reacted. He asked if I wanted to see his private collection. I hesitated, but he said it was just in the next room. The way he said, "private," made me uncomfortable, but I followed him anyway. He walked ahead and opened a heavy door that looked newer than the rest of the apartment. I stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the temperature. It was freezing. The walls were covered with canvases, floor to ceiling. No windows, just one lamp hanging above a metal table with some paint stains on it. Then I heard it, a soft mechanical click behind me. I turned around and saw the door had shut. Not slammed, just closed on its own. I reached for the handle, but it didn't move. He told me not to worry, that it was just the automatic lock. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen any keypad or button when I walked in, but the door was sealed like it was part of the wall. He started explaining something about his process, but I barely heard it. My brain was on overdrive. I noticed more things in that room the longer I stood there. The canvases weren't just paintings. They were layered with what looked like real fabric and hair. Some had jewelry glued onto them. There was one in the corner that looked half torn, and behind it, I could see something red, maybe paint, maybe not. I pretended to stay calm and asked about one of the pieces near the door, hoping to get closer. He moved toward me like he was showing it off, but his body language had changed. His eyes weren't following my face anymore. They were watching my hands. He told me that art could capture people. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Then everything happened at once. A loud banging echoed from the front of the apartment. It was so sudden that I jumped back. He froze. Another hit came, louder this time, and a voice yelled for someone to open up. He muttered something I didn't catch and went to the door, fumbling with his phone. The noise kept getting louder until the front door burst open. I heard heavy footsteps, shouting, and a crash. I backed away from the locked door, pressing myself against the wall. Within seconds, it swung open and 2 police officers rushed in with flashlights. They pulled me out fast, telling me not to look back. I didn't argue. In the hallway, there were more officers and one older woman who lived in the building. She was crying, saying she called them because she heard screaming a few nights ago coming from the same apartment. She thought she was imagining it until she saw me walk in earlier. She said it was too much like what happened before. I had no idea what she meant. They kept me outside while they searched the place. I sat on the curb with a blanket one of them gave me, shaking but not from the cold. I could hear muffled voices over their radios, one of them saying they found something consistent with the last report. When Marcus came out in handcuffs, his face looked completely blank. Not angry, not scared, just empty. A detective came over to talk to me later. He said they had been investigating him for weeks after another woman went missing. She had matched with him on Hinge too. Neighbors had heard noises that night, but by the time police got there, he was gone. They had a warrant ready in case he tried to meet someone again. I guess I was the next one. They showed me photos of the paintings they found in his studio, but I couldn't look at them. I didn't want to know who those faceless women were supposed to be. They said one of the canvases matched the missing woman's height and build exactly. I couldn't stop thinking about how he said he painted moments that disappear. They took my statement and drove me home around midnight. I didn't even remember the drive. Everything felt like static. When I got home, I deleted Hinge, Instagram, everything. For weeks after, every time I walked past an art gallery or saw someone sketching in public, my stomach twisted. I never saw the news story when it came out, but my friend read it later and told me they found locks like that in other buildings too, all set to trigger once the door shut. The police said he used them to make people stay still for inspiration. I still think about how close that lock sound was behind me, how normal it seemed for half a second before everything changed. It started like one of those random nights where you just agree to plans because staying home feels worse. I matched with this girl named Leela on Hinge. She had these bright photos, sunsets, city lights, her sitting on some ledge smiling with the skyline behind her. She seemed confident, the kind of person who always knows the coolest spots around town. We talked for maybe 2 days before she asked if I wanted to hang out that weekend. She said she wanted to show me the best view in the city. I didn't really think twice. She told me to meet her near the station at 8. When I got there, it was already dark, but the air was warm. She showed up a few minutes later wearing this oversized hoodie, hair tied up, carrying a backpack. She had that kind of energy where you instantly relax. She was laughing about how she was late because of the train. She said the place wasn't far, just a quick walk. We started walking through the quieter side of the city, away from the shops and bars. It was the part full of offices and tall buildings that were mostly dark at night. She kept talking the whole way about how she loved heights and how sunsets looked better when no one else was around. I didn't mind. I was just following her, curious about where this view was. After 10 minutes, we reached this building that looked like some kind of old government office. Big glass doors, metal fencing around the side, and a sign near the front that said, "No public access after hours." I laughed a little and asked if we were supposed to be there. She smirked and said she knew someone who worked there and that the top floor had an open balcony. She said she'd been there before and that security didn't care. The way she said it sounded confident, like this was something she did all the time. She led me around the side where a smaller gate was half open. My gut said it was off, but I followed anyway. Inside the gate, there was a metal staircase that went all the way up to the roof. It was dark except for a flickering street light nearby. I remember the sound of our shoes hitting the stairs, echoing against the walls. She climbed fast, like she knew exactly where she was going. When we finally reached the top, she pushed open this heavy metal door that led to the roof. The wind hit us hard. It was quiet up there, the whole city stretching out in front of us. The view really was insane. You could see everything, the skyline glowing, cars moving like little dots, the river glinting under the streetlights. She laughed and spread her arms out like she was showing me something she built herself. I actually started to relax. For a while, we just stood there, talking about random stuff. She pulled out a thermos from her backpack and said she brought coffee. We sat near the ledge, watching the cars below, drinking from paper cups. I remember her saying how she used to come up there whenever life felt too loud. That's when I noticed how close we were to the neighboring buildings. Most of them were dark, but a few had those big industrial fans on the roof. Then I saw it, a red blinking light attached to some metal antenna near us. It looked like a beacon, the kind you see on communication towers. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about it made me uneasy. I asked if this was really just an office building. She hesitated before saying she wasn't completely sure what it was now, but it used to be something government-related. She laughed like it was a joke, but I didn't. Maybe 5 minutes later, I started hearing a low humming sound. I thought it was just wind or machinery, but it got louder fast. Then there was this bright white light that cut across the rooftop like a spotlight. My first thought was that someone was playing a prank, but the light moved, sweeping over us. When I looked up, I saw it was coming from a helicopter. The sound was deafening. The wind from the blades was so strong it made the paper cups roll away. I couldn't even hear her properly, just bits of her voice yelling over the noise. I could see people in the helicopter pointing down at us. Then, from the far side of the roof, a voice through a speaker shouted something I couldn't make out. She stood up and started waving her arms like it was some misunderstanding, but the light stayed locked on her. A second later, I saw flashing lights on the ground. Police cars. Dozens of them. Someone on a loudspeaker shouted again, and this time I caught part of it. They were telling us to stay still. That's when it hit me. We weren't supposed to be there at all. Leela looked panicked for the first time. She turned to me, trying to explain, but she couldn't get the words out. She started saying something about how the building used to belong to her dad's company, and that she thought no one used it anymore. I didn't even know what to believe. The helicopter light stayed fixed on us as the noise from the street grew louder. Within minutes, officers were on the roof. They came through the same stairwell we'd used, yelling for us to get down. I dropped to my knees instantly, hands up. She did too, but she kept trying to talk, saying it was all a mistake. They didn't listen. One of them handcuffed her while another pulled me aside and started asking questions. Down on the street, they put us both into separate cars. I tried to explain I had no idea what was going on. One officer told me that building wasn't just any office. It was part of a restricted communications center linked to the government. They said people weren't even allowed within certain floors without clearance. I sat there in the back seat, staring at the flashing lights bouncing off the windows, wondering how the hell I ended up there from a dating app. Later that night, after they checked everything and confirmed my story, they let me go. They kept her. The officer who drove me home said she'd been caught on camera climbing the fence 2 other times that month. Apparently, she liked sneaking into rooftops of secure places and filming the view for her social media. One of the clips had been tagged with that same building's location, which was how security started watching it. He said I was lucky the helicopter spotted us early. If they hadn't, we might have been detained for hours or worse. I didn't even know what to say. I just stared out the window, watching the lights of the city she'd wanted me to see. When I got home, I deleted Hinge again. Not because of her exactly, but because I kept thinking how random it all was. One swipe, one message, and suddenly you're sitting on a roof with sirens below you and a helicopter above you. I read the news the next morning. It said a woman was arrested for trespassing on a restricted government facility, caught with a civilian guest during unauthorized rooftop activity. I didn't even have to guess who it was. I didn't tell anyone about that night. I just kept thinking about how she said the view was worth it.
Hey guys, really sorry to interrupt. If you're still listening, then you're enjoying the story so far. And if you are enjoying, then please hit that like button. That's all I ask of you. Thanks so much. Now back to the stories.
It started normal. Just another Hinge match after a slow week. His name was Adam. He looked clean-cut, worked in construction, and had that calm kind of confidence in the way he messaged. No weird compliments, no dry small talk. Just easy conversation. He said he wanted to take me out for dinner somewhere quiet. He mentioned this restaurant outside town that apparently had the best burgers ever. He offered to drive since it was on the way home from his site. I didn't think much of it. It was a public place, and he seemed normal. I even told my friend his name before I left, like I always do. She said to share my location, and I did. Everything about it felt routine. When he pulled up, the first thing I noticed was how spotless his car was. It wasn't new, but it looked cared for. The seats had those fake leather covers, and the air freshener smelled like pine. He had this upbeat playlist going quietly, tapping the steering wheel as we drove. We talked about random things: food, work, travel. He was funny, actually. Nothing about him set off alarms. About 20 minutes into the drive, I started to notice how far we'd gone. The city lights were gone, replaced by empty roads and open fields. He said the restaurant was a bit hidden. I told myself that made sense for a local spot. The only thing that started to bother me was the noise. At first, I thought it was the road, a dull thump every few seconds. I ignored it, but it kept coming back. Not constant, just enough to notice, like something shifting around. I asked if his car was okay, and he laughed, saying it always made weird noises. Then it got louder. A clear, heavy thud. It didn't sound mechanical. It sounded like someone hitting metal from inside the boot. I remember my stomach tightening instantly. He looked at me for half a second when it happened, but didn't say anything. I waited, pretending not to notice, and then it happened again. Louder this time. He reached over and turned the music up. That's when I really started panicking. I asked what that sound was, trying to keep my voice calm. He said something like, "Probably tools rolling around." But his tone changed, shorter, colder. He didn't look at me again after that. I pulled out my phone, pretending to text. The location showed we were way outside the city now, near some industrial area. I started thinking about how to get out, how fast the car was going, what would happen if I just told him to stop. But before I could say anything, red and blue lights flashed in the mirrors. He cursed under his breath and slowed down. A police car came up behind us, siren blaring. I've never been more relieved in my life. He pulled over, annoyed, saying he must have been speeding without realizing. 2 officers got out. One came to his window, the other walked around the car. They asked for his license and started the usual questions. I tried not to look terrified, but I'm sure I did. While they were talking, another sound came, one solid, muffled thump from the back. Both officers froze. The one at the window asked him what that was. Adam tried to laugh it off again, said it was tools or maybe something in the spare tire compartment. But the officer at the back stepped closer, tapping on the boot. The noise came again. The officer immediately told him to step out of the car. Adam looked like he was about to argue, but then one of them reached for his radio and he gave in. It told me to stay inside. I sat completely still while they walked him toward the side of the road. Another patrol car pulled up not long after. One of the officers went to the boot and unlocked it. I saw his face change instantly. He shouted something, and within seconds, everything turned into chaos. They yanked open the boot fully, and that's when I saw it. There was someone inside. Hands tied, duct tape over their mouth, eyes wide open. I couldn't even process it. The officer called for backup while the other dragged Adam to the ground. He didn't fight. He just stared at the road, completely silent. The person in the boot was a woman. She looked like she'd been there for hours, maybe longer. They helped her out, covered her with a blanket, and put her into one of the police cars. I sat frozen, shaking so hard I couldn't even get the door open when they asked me to step out. An officer finally helped me out and asked a few quick questions. How I knew him, where we were going, what I'd seen. I told them everything word for word, even the sounds. One of them nodded and said it wasn't my fault. I don't even remember responding. Later, I found out they had been looking for that woman. She'd been reported missing 2 days earlier. They said she matched someone Adam had met through another app. The police believed he was using different profiles to meet people, and then, well, they didn't say the rest out loud. They took me to the station for a full statement. I sat there under the fluorescent lights for hours while they asked about the car, what time I met him, what we talked about. My hands were still shaking the whole time. I kept thinking about the moment he turned the music up. That small, stupid detail that suddenly meant everything. They told me later that the only reason the cops had even pulled him over was because of a speeding complaint from another driver who thought he looked suspicious weaving through traffic. They said if that hadn't happened, it might have been hours before anyone found out. When they finally let me go, the officer who drove me home said that kind of thing happens more than people think. He said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt sick. I deleted Hinge the second I got inside, sat on the floor, and stared at my phone for what felt like forever. I read about it in the news the next day. It didn't use my name, but they mentioned a woman being rescued from a car trunk after a traffic stop. They showed his photo. Same smile as the one from his profile, same normal look. If you didn't know, you'd never guess. I stopped using dating apps after that. I couldn't even get in a car with someone I didn't know for months. Every small noise made me think of that sound again, the thumping from the boot. Not a regular restaurant one, but something about experimental pop-up dining. The photos looked cool, plates arranged like art, dim lighting, a crowd of people eating at what looked like a warehouse. I thought it was just one of those underground food events that people post about online. Her name was Maya, and she had this chill, artsy vibe in every message. She said she was planning a new private tasting night and needed someone to try it out before she launched it publicly. It sounded harmless enough. We talked a few days before I agreed to go. She told me to meet her near an old part of town, not too far from the canal. I thought it was weird she didn't just give me the name of the restaurant, but she said it wasn't listed yet since it was invite only. I didn't really know what that meant, but she seemed passionate about her work, so I went with it. The night I met her, she was wearing an apron over regular clothes, like she'd been cooking all day. She was talkative, funny, and had that confident energy people in kitchens usually have. She told me she'd been doing this for years, running pop-ups in different spots across the city. She said it kept things fresh. She offered to drive since the place was hard to find. We got there around 8 p.m. It wasn't a restaurant. It was a warehouse. There was music coming from inside, but it wasn't loud. Just that bass-heavy kind that sounds like background noise from a club. She said they used it to set the vibe. When we walked in, there were long wooden tables set up, candles everywhere, and about 20 people scattered around eating and drinking. It looked more like a party than a dinner. A few people nodded at her like they knew her. She walked straight behind a makeshift counter and started talking to some guy in a hoodie who was handing her a wad of cash. She smiled and tucked it into her apron like it was normal. I thought maybe he just paid for catering or something. The food actually looked legit: pasta dishes, grilled stuff, cocktails being mixed in plastic cups. But the whole setup was weird. There was no menu, no prices, no staff. Everyone just came up, said what they wanted, and gave her money in cash. She told me to sit wherever, and she'd bring me something special. I sat near the end of one of the tables. The people around me weren't really talking about food, though. They were whispering, laughing, and passing little packets between each other under the table. It clicked pretty fast that this wasn't a normal dinner event. I didn't know what I'd walked into, but the vibe was off. When Maya came back with a plate, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Not nervous shaking, more like she'd had too much caffeine or something. She smiled and told me to dig in, said it was one of her signature dishes. I took a few bites. It was good, but I couldn't focus on the taste. There was this constant stream of people going in and out of the side door behind her. Every few minutes, someone new would walk up, hand her money, grab something small from under the counter, and leave again. I started to realize she wasn't just serving food. The guy in the hoodie came back again, whispering to her, and she opened one of the containers on the shelf behind her. It wasn't flour or sugar. The packets were too small, sealed tight, and labeled with letters. That's when I knew. She wasn't just a chef. She was using the fake restaurant as a front. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to make a scene. I told her I was going to grab some air, and she just smiled and nodded. I walked toward the door, trying to look casual, but as soon as I stepped outside, I saw two vans parked across the street. No headlights, no noise, just sitting there. I started walking faster, thinking maybe I could just call a cab and disappear before whatever was happening got worse. But before I even made it to the corner, I heard the music inside cut off. Then came the yelling. Heavy boots, shouting, glass breaking. I turned around and saw police rushing into the warehouse from both entrances. The lights from the vans came on all at once, blinding bright. Everything went insane. People ran in every direction, some trying to jump fences, others throwing stuff into bins. I froze near the gate while officers poured in, shouting for everyone to get down. Within seconds, it was chaos: sirens, lights, people crying, plates shattering on the floor. One officer grabbed me and asked what I was doing there. I told him I was on a date. He looked at me like he didn't believe it, but then he pointed toward the crowd inside and asked if I knew her. Maya was on the floor, hands behind her back, face pressed down. The apron she'd been wearing was half ripped, and there were rolls of cash spilling out of it. They led me away while they searched the building. I could hear them calling out numbers, counting what they found. One officer mentioned something about narcotics and laundering. I didn't even understand half of it. They took me to the station for questioning. I told them everything, how I met her, what she said about the pop-up, how she never mentioned anything illegal. They checked my phone and verified the messages. I think they realized I wasn't involved pretty quickly. They said she'd been under investigation for months, using fake events as a cover for cash drops. Apparently, she'd been moving money for some local dealers through these tasting nights. The reason they raided that night was because one of the regulars tipped them off after getting caught earlier. When they finally let me go, it was almost morning. The officer driving me back said it was good I didn't run or try to hide anything because they'd have assumed I was part of it. I didn't say anything. I just stared out the window, watching the city start to wake up. Later, I read about it online. They called it Operation Ember. The report said a pop-up dining event had been exposed as a front for laundering thousands in drug money. It mentioned arrests, charges, evidence, everything. They even showed photos of the same candles and tables I'd sat at like it was some kind of twisted dinner party. I deleted Hinge that day, not because of fear or trust issues, but because it felt like everything about that night was fake. The laughter, the food, the smiles, every part of it was staged to make people believe something normal was happening. Sometimes I still think about how calm she looked before the raid started, like she knew it might happen and just didn't care anymore. I met him on Hinge during a quiet weekend when I wasn't really looking for anything serious. His name was Tyler. His profile looked harmless, grainy photos, a smile that seemed genuine, and one caption that said, "Cheap but vintage." I thought he meant his fashion or something. He looked like one of those artsy guys who thrift shop everything and live off black coffee. He messaged first, saying he liked that I seemed low maintenance. I laughed it off and replied. We talked for a few days, mostly about random stuff, movies, food, his obsession with old buildings. He said he lived in a vintage apartment near the edge of town. He kept calling it that, vintage. He said rent was cheap, the view was great, and the place had character. He invited me over for dinner on a Friday night, said he was going to cook something simple. I was a little nervous but curious. He seemed calm and different from the usual loud guys I matched with. He even offered to pick me up, but I said I'd drive myself. I remember him hesitating a bit before agreeing, like he wasn't expecting that. It was raining that night, the kind of rain that turns the streets shiny and quiet. He sent me his address, and I put it into maps. It was farther out than I expected, past the main road and into this area with older houses and closed shops. Streetlights were sparse, and some buildings looked half abandoned. The kind of area you drive through not to. I parked on the corner, double-checking the address. It pointed to an old red brick building with cracked windows and peeling paint. I thought maybe it looked worse from the outside and nicer inside, but something about it didn't sit right. The front steps were covered in wet leaves, and the main door was slightly open. I texted him that I was outside, but he didn't reply. When I walked closer, I noticed yellow tape fluttering near the door. It looked like the kind police use to block off areas. My stomach dropped a little. I stopped, trying to figure out if I was at the wrong place. There was no sound except the rain. I walked around the side and saw more tape stretched across one of the broken windows. It said, "Do not enter." The windows were boarded from the inside, and through the cracks I could see a faint light flickering. That's when my phone buzzed. Tyler texted me saying he was out front. I looked around, but no one was there. Then I heard movement above me. I looked up and saw him leaning out of a window 2 floors up, waving down. He yelled that the front was just for show, and that I should come around the back. He said the main door was jammed because the landlord never fixed it. He laughed like it was a running joke. I didn't move for a few seconds. The rain got heavier, and I remember thinking maybe he really did live in one of those rundown apartments that just hadn't been renovated yet. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked down the alley beside the building. The back door was half open. Inside, it was dimly lit by a bunch of candles sitting on a crate. The hallway smelled like mold and wet wood. I called out for him, and he answered from upstairs, telling me to come up. The stairs creaked with every step, and I noticed piles of stuff, old clothes, paint buckets, blankets rolled up against the walls. It didn't look like anyone actually owned the place. It looked abandoned. When I got to the second floor, he appeared at the end of the hall holding 2 plates of pasta. He smiled like everything was fine, like we weren't standing in a condemned building. He told me not to mind the mess, that the place had history. He led me into what used to be an apartment, but it was mostly empty. The only furniture was a mattress on the floor, 2 folding chairs, and a crate being used as a table. A camping stove sat by the window. The more I looked around, the stranger it got. There were no working lights, just candles everywhere. The walls had holes where outlets used to be, and one corner had a pile of old newspapers and food wrappers. He said the landlord was renovating and that he liked the raw look. He said he was paying cheap rent because the building was set for demolition soon. I wanted to believe him, but nothing about it felt right. He started talking about how hard it was to find good rent in the city and how people didn't appreciate old architecture anymore. I kept nodding, pretending to listen, while I scanned the room for anything that looked normal. The pasta on my plate was cold. Then, while he was talking, I heard voices outside. Not close, but distant, echoing down the hall. Flashlight beams flickered through the cracks in the boarded windows. Tyler froze mid-sentence. His whole expression changed. He looked toward the window, then back at me, whispering that we had to keep quiet. Before I could ask why, someone shouted from downstairs. It was a man's voice, clear and commanding. Another voice answered. Then came footsteps. Tyler grabbed one of the blankets and started throwing it over some boxes like he was trying to hide something. He told me to stay still, that they'd go away soon. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they'd hear it. The footsteps got closer, and I could see the flashlights now shining through the gaps in the boards. The door burst open seconds later. 2 police officers stepped in with flashlights raised. One of them shouted for us to stay where we were. Tyler immediately threw his hands up and started saying it was a misunderstanding, that he had permission to stay there. The officers didn't even respond. One of them pulled out a paper and started reading something about trespassing and illegal occupancy. I stood there, not knowing if I should say anything. One officer turned to me and asked if I lived there too. I told him no, that I just met him. They told me to leave the building immediately. As I walked out, I heard one of them tell Tyler he'd been warned before, that this wasn't his first time. Outside, there were more police cars and a white van with city property written on the side. One officer asked me to wait by my car while they dealt with him. I saw them escort him out a few minutes later, handcuffed, his face blank. One of the officers explained that the building had been empty for months. It used to be public housing, but was shut down for safety issues. Tyler had been squatting there for weeks, pretending he lived there. They said he used dating apps to bring people over for company, spinning stories about being a tenant. Someone had reported lights moving inside earlier that night, which was why they showed up. When they let me go, I sat in my car for a long time, just watching the flashing lights fade against the rain. I kept thinking about how he said, cheap but vintage. I guess he wasn't lying. I deleted Hinge that night, not because I was scared of dating again, but because it made me realize how little you actually know about someone, even when they sound completely normal. It started on a cold Tuesday night when I matched with this girl named Zoe on Hinge. Her profile looked normal, photos of coffee shops, a cat, and a selfie by a mirror in what looked like a cozy flat. Her bio said she just moved into a new place and was still unpacking. We started talking about movies, food, boring stuff, but she was funny and actually easy to talk to. She said she was still decorating and that I should come by one night to see it. It didn't sound weird at first. I'd done house dates before, Netflixed, takeaway, nothing serious. She said she didn't want to go out because she was tired from moving and just wanted to chill. She sent me the address, and I told her I'd bring food. When I got there, the street looked rough. Not dangerous exactly, just forgotten. The kind of place where most buildings have broken blinds and faded paint. I parked outside and double-checked the address on my phone. It matched. The building was an old terrace, the kind that looked like it used to be offices or something. No lights on except one window flickering upstairs. I texted her that I was there. A few seconds later, she replied saying the buzzer didn't work and to come around the side. There was a narrow alleyway leading to a back door with peeling paint. When I got closer, I noticed it had one of those metal panels across the bottom, like it had been broken before. She must have read my face because she opened the door before I knocked, smiling like nothing was weird. She looked different from her pictures, same face, just more tired. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing layers like it was freezing inside. She said the heating wasn't fully set up yet, but she had blankets. I stepped inside and was instantly clear something was off. The hallway smelled damp, like wet plaster. The air was heavy and cold. There was no sound of a fridge or anything electrical. The only light came from a camping lantern sitting on a box. She led me into what she called the living room, but it didn't look like one. There was a mattress on the floor, 2 crates acting as tables, and 1 old chair. The wallpaper was half stripped, and you could see the outline of where something had been spray painted over. She started talking fast, saying the place was still a work in progress, that the landlord hadn't installed the electric yet but promised it would be done soon. I nodded, pretending I believed it. I noticed the windows had boards on the outside, not shutters, actual wooden planks nailed across them. I asked where I could put the food, and she pointed to the floor near a candle. There were no plates, just 2 takeaway containers from before sitting half empty. She told me she'd been settling in slowly, which didn't make sense because there wasn't a single box or bag anywhere. We sat down on the mattress, eating in near darkness. She kept saying how peaceful the place was, how no one ever bothered her, and how she got the deal through a friend. She said rent was unbelievably cheap, which made me laugh until I realized she wasn't joking. The air got colder the longer I sat there. Every time I exhaled, I could see my breath. I asked if she had heat, and she said not yet, but that she had methods. That's when she pulled out a small metal pot and poured in something that looked like gel. She lit it with a lighter, and a small flame popped up. It didn't look safe at all, but she smiled like she'd done it before. Then I heard a sound from upstairs, like a door slamming or something heavy moving. I froze. She didn't even flinch. I asked if someone else lived there, and she said it was just the pipes, that the building made noises sometimes. I wasn't convinced. A few minutes later, another sound, closer this time. Boots on the stairs. My stomach dropped. She glanced at me, her smile flickering, and whispered that if anyone knocked, I should stay quiet. Before I could ask why, there was a loud banging on the front door. She went still. The knocking came again, harder. Then a voice shouted her name. I couldn't tell if it was angry or urgent. She didn't move, just kept staring at the door like she was waiting for something. Another bang shook the frame, and I stood up, ready to leave. Then everything exploded at once. The door burst open, and light flooded the room. Fire crews, police, all shouting. One officer pulled me away before I could even say anything. They rushed in, yelling for her to stand down. She started crying, saying she didn't do anything wrong, that she just wanted somewhere to live. I was dragged outside with the others. The whole street was filled with flashing lights and people in uniforms. The building looked worse from the outside under all that light, windows boarded, roof half collapsed. An officer told me to stand back while they checked the place. One of them asked me how I knew her. I told him it was just a date that we met online. He nodded slowly and said I was lucky they got there when they did. I asked what he meant, and he said the property had been condemned for almost a year. No electricity, no running water, no heat. She had been lighting fires to keep warm, and neighbors kept calling because they smelled smoke. He said she'd been warned before but kept breaking back in, pretending she owned it. I watched them lead her out. She looked completely different under the flashing lights, dirty clothes, hands shaking, mascara smeared. She looked straight at me and said she didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't know what to say. The officer said she'd been living there for months, moving between abandoned properties around the city. They said she'd been evicted from her last place and never got another lease, so she started squatting. Sometimes she'd use dating apps to meet people who'd bring food or blankets. They thought she did it to survive more than anything else. They let me go after taking my statement. I got in my car and just sat there, watching the fire crews tape off the whole building. The blue lights reflected on the wet pavement, and for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about that little metal pot she used for warmth. I drove home in silence. I deleted her number and the app that night. Not because I was scared, but because it made me realize how fragile some people really are. How easy it is for someone to look completely normal behind a profile and be living like that in reality. I read about it later online. The article said a young woman was found occupying a condemned flat and was being taken in for psychiatric evaluation. They didn't mention her name, but I didn't need to see it. The weirdest part is that I still think about how calm she was before the door burst open, like she'd accepted that it was temporary all along. I met her on Hinge on a random Wednesday night when I was bored at home. Her name was Layla. She had a couple of photos in office clothes, one of her sitting at a desk, and her bio said something like, too busy for small talk, but not for good company. She seemed smart, a bit sarcastic, and not like the usual kind of girl I'm matched with. She said she worked long hours at a tech company and sometimes stayed late to get peace and quiet. We talked for a few days before she suggested meeting up. She said she couldn't go out that weekend because of deadlines but offered something different. She said we could hang out at her workplace after hours. She said it was private, no noise, no interruptions, and that she had access to a break area with food and drinks. It sounded strange, but the way she said it made it seem like she was used to staying late there. I figured maybe she just liked showing off her workspace. She worked at this big corporate building near the business district, the kind of place with tinted glass windows and revolving doors. When I got there, it was almost 9 p.m. The area was quiet, just a low buzz of streetlights and a few cars passing. She texted me to meet her at the side entrance instead of the main one. She said it was easier to get in that way because she had a temporary keycard. When I walked around to the side, she was already there, holding a card against the reader. The door clicked, and she smiled, saying she'd been waiting. She looked good, tired, but good. She had her work badge around her neck, and a tote bag slung over her shoulder that looked heavier than usual. Inside, the building was dead silent. No lights except a few dim ones in the hall. It smelled like coffee and cleaning spray. She said the security team left after 8, so it was just us. I followed her up to the 3rd floor, where the offices were. Every step echoed. She led me to this open-plan area full of cubicles. Everything looked organized and expensive. Monitors, keyboards, gadgets everywhere. She said this was the IT department and joked that it was like a second home. She wasn't wrong. There was a blanket on one chair and snacks stacked near her desk. We sat down, and she opened a small fridge in the corner, pulling out 2 cans of soda. She said she wasn't supposed to have guests, but no one ever checked. I laughed, trying to act normal, but I couldn't stop noticing how jumpy she seemed. Every sound made her glance at the hallway. After a while, she asked if I wanted to see where the magic happens. She pointed toward a locked door across the office. She said that's where they kept all the prototypes and testing units for new electronics. I told her I didn't want to get her in trouble, but she said she had clearance. She reached in her bag and pulled out another card, saying it worked on most of the doors. She scanned it, and the door clicked open. Inside was a storage room filled with shelves stacked with boxes and expensive-looking gear, laptops, tablets, cables. She said they were just backups, nothing too important. She seemed weirdly comfortable touching everything, running her fingers across boxes, checking labels like she knew exactly where everything was. She started talking about how much waste the company created, how they threw away working equipment all the time. She said she hated watching good tech go unused. I just nodded, but something about how she was talking felt off. Her tone wasn't frustration, it was obsession. Then, as she leaned over one of the shelves, something metallic clattered inside her bag. I glanced down and saw the edge of a wrapped laptop poking out. She noticed me looking and quickly zipped it shut, saying she'd borrowed one to fix at home. I didn't argue, but my stomach twisted. About 10 minutes later, while we were sitting by her desk again, alarms suddenly blared through the building. Loud, echoing, piercing alarms. She froze instantly. I asked what was going on, but she didn't answer. She just whispered that we needed to leave now. We ran down the hallway, her bag bouncing against her side. I could hear voices below, security shouting, and the sound of heavy footsteps. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back stairwell. I asked if it was a fire alarm, but she said no, it was motion sensors. She said they only triggered if someone opened restricted rooms without permission. My heart was pounding as we reached the bottom. Before we could get out, bright flashlight beams hit us. 3 security guards came rushing through the lobby, followed by 2 police officers. One of them shouted for us to stop. Layla dropped her bag instantly, eyes wide. It made us sit on the ground while they checked the bag. Inside were 3 sealed laptops, 2 tablets, and a pair of wireless headsets, all with property stickers still attached. I sat there staring, unable to process it. She didn't say a word, just stared at the floor like she already knew what was coming. The officers questioned us separately. I told them everything. How we met, how she said she worked there, how I thought this was her office. They didn't look surprised. One of them told me quietly that this wasn't her first time. They said she'd been fired from a different company last year for stealing tech equipment, and she'd been blacklisted from several others. Apparently, she'd been sneaking into this new building using stolen access cards and pretending to still work there. They said she used dating apps to meet people so she wouldn't look suspicious coming in with company. It made her blend in better on security footage. That was the part that hit me hardest, realizing I'd just been a prop in her routine. They arrested her right there, handcuffed, still silent. I watched as they let her out, her head down, bag hanging from one of the officers' hands. The building lights flickered back on, and I sat there alone in the empty office. It looked totally different now, sterile, cold, like it was never meant for people to be there after dark. The police gave me a ride home and took a formal statement the next day. It said she was facing charges for theft and trespassing. When they let me go, I scrolled through our old texts again, noticing all the small clues I'd missed, the way she said, "I still have access," or how she joked that tech companies owe her. A week later, I read an article online about the case. It said a former IT worker had been caught stealing electronics from multiple offices across the city. It didn't mention her name, but the photo was her, walking out in handcuffs, same tote bag, same blank stare. Sometimes I still think about how normal she seemed when she said we have privacy at her work. I thought it was some romantic thing. Turns out it was just cover for a crime. His name was Ryan, and he had that confident, serious vibe in his photos. Short hair, black jacket, and the kind of smile that looked like he didn't show it often. His bio said something about long hours, strong coffee, and serving the community. It didn't sound like the usual fake stuff guys write, so I believed him. When we started talking, he was polite, almost too polite. He didn't flirt much, but he had this way of talking that made everything sound official. He said he worked night shifts a lot, and that it was nice to talk to someone who got how unpredictable life could be. He mentioned being based at a nearby precinct, but said he couldn't talk much about what he did. I figured that made sense for his job. After a week of chatting, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner. He said he'd make a reservation at a place near the city center, a diner that stayed open late. I agreed. It wasn't fancy, but I liked that. It felt more relaxed than some formal restaurant. The night of the date, he showed up in a black jacket with a badge clipped to his belt. I noticed it right away because it caught the light when he leaned in to greet me. He smiled and said he had just come off duty. I asked if he wanted to go home first to change, and he said no, that he was used to going out straight from work. It didn't strike me as weird. We sat down, ordered food, and started talking. He had that kind of personality where you half listen because he keeps switching between stories. He talked about traffic stops, about cases, about crazy shifts. Some of the things he said were kind of intense, but he said them so casually that I didn't question it. Every few minutes, he glanced around the room like he was watching for something. He said it was habit from work. The waitress brought our food and called him officer. I guess she noticed the badge too. He smiled at her like it wasn't the first time that happened. He told her to keep the receipt open because he was expecting another drink later. I remember thinking he seemed relaxed for someone who supposedly worked in law enforcement. Halfway through dinner, he started getting comfortable, too comfortable. He leaned back, showing the badge more clearly, and started talking about how hard it was to date when people didn't respect his job. He said women either got intimidated or tried to use him to get out of tickets. He said he liked that I wasn't like that. I just laughed awkwardly and kept eating. Then things started feeling off. The waitress came back, and I noticed she looked uncomfortable. She kept glancing at the badge but avoided eye contact with him. She asked quietly if everything was okay. I said yes, confused, and she nodded, walking away quickly. A few minutes later, I saw her talking to someone near the counter. A man in plain clothes, tall, with a short haircut. He looked like he was arguing softly with her. Ryan noticed too. He stopped mid-sentence and turned around to look. His whole expression changed. The man walked over to our table, and before I could say anything, he showed an actual badge. He said he was a detective from the local precinct and asked Ryan to step outside for a moment. The air around the table went heavy. Ryan froze. He laughed a little, like it was some kind of joke, and said something about misunderstanding. The detective didn't smile. Within seconds, 2 uniformed officers walked in from the door. Everyone in the diner went quiet. The waitress backed out behind the counter. Ryan tried to stand, but one of the officers blocked him. The detective told him again to step outside. This time, Ryan didn't argue. He got up slowly, and as soon as he did, the detective grabbed the badge from his belt. It wasn't real. They walked him outside while everyone in the diner watched. I sat there frozen, not sure if I should leave or stay. The waitress came over and said quietly that she'd seen him before. He'd been coming in for weeks, flashing that same badge, getting free meals and drinks by claiming he was on duty. She said they'd finally called it in after one of the staff saw his photo on a local watch list for impersonation. I didn't even know what to say. I looked out the window and saw them cuffing him beside a car. He wasn't fighting, just standing there, talking fast like he was trying to explain himself. A real officer came inside a few minutes later and asked if I was with him. I said yes, that it was our first date. They asked a few questions. How we met, what he told me, if I'd seen his badge before. I told them everything. The officer nodded and said they'd been tracking him for a while. Apparently, he'd been using fake badges to pose as a cop around the city. Sometimes to impress people, sometimes to get discounts or free stuff. A few restaurants had already filed reports. They said he didn't just fake being the cop. He went all in. He bought the gear, memorized codes, even used real department names to sound legit. He'd been caught once before, but got released pending investigation. This time, they said, they had enough evidence to charge him properly. When they finally let me go, I sat in my car for a while, staring at my phone. I looked through our texts again, and all little things suddenly stood out. The way he said, off duty, the way he talked like he was used to authority, the badge he never really put away. I hadn't questioned any of it. The next day, I read the story online. It was everywhere. Man arrested for impersonating police officer in local diner. They even had a picture of the badge. It looked convincing, almost identical to the real thing. The article said he'd been scamming people for months, pretending to be law enforcement to get free meals, skip lines, and impress dates. The weirdest part was the quote at the end. It said he claimed he never meant harm, that he just liked the respect people gave him when he wore it. I didn't tell anyone about that night for a while. Every time I tried, I felt stupid for not noticing. He'd been so calm, so believable. He even thanked the waitress like he actually deserved the discount. Now, whenever someone says they work in law enforcement on an app, I don't just take their word for it. I don't care if it sounds paranoid. That fake badge looked real until the real one showed up. It started like one of those random late-night matches that turn into something interesting for no reason. His name was Joel. His profile wasn't flashy, just a few casual photos, a half smile, and a line that said, "I make movies wherever I can." I thought it meant he was into indie films or something, but when I asked, he said he liked hosting outdoor screenings. He said he had his own projector and would sometimes set up small movie nights for friends. It sounded unique, harmless, kind of fun. We talked for about a week before he invited me to one. He said he was setting up something small in a parking lot near the edge of the city. I laughed and asked if that was even allowed, and he said it was fine. He'd done it before and no one ever cared. He said it'd be private, just us, and that he'd bring snacks and blankets. The night came, and it was colder than I expected. I drove there thinking it was going to be awkward, but curiosity won. The place wasn't creepy exactly. It was one of those abandoned retail parks with faded parking lines and an empty building at the back. He'd already arrived when I got there. His car was parked facing a large white wall, and a small projector sat on a fold-out table. A blanket was spread on the hood, and he waved when he saw me. He was taller than I expected, quiet but friendly. He had a laptop connected to the projector, wires tangled everywhere, and a bunch of snacks piled on a chair. He said we'd start once it got darker. I remember thinking it was kind of weirdly romantic in a DIY way. We sat on the hood of his car, drinking from paper cups, waiting for the film to start. He kept talking about how movies were meant to be watched outside the noise, how he hated theaters and people on their phones. He seemed really into it, passionate in a way that almost made sense. When the movie started, it looked decent quality. He said he downloaded old classics that weren't copyrighted anymore. I didn't think to question it. The sound came from small Bluetooth speakers, and the whole setup felt oddly professional for a parking lot thing. For the first 20 minutes, it was peaceful. Just us, the glow from the projector, and a hum of cars far in the distance. Then I started noticing little things. His laptop kept showing weird pop-ups in the corner of the screen. Not ads, not movie notifications, just small windows with code and numbers flashing. He tried to minimize them quickly, but they kept reappearing. I asked if it was just glitches, and he laughed it off. saying it was background software for sensing visuals. A few minutes later, he got up and started checking the back of the projector. He looked nervous. I thought maybe the battery was dying, but then he told me quietly that sometimes the system acted up. The way he said it made me uneasy. I asked what system he meant, and he brushed it off again. Then something flickered on the wall. For half a second, the movie cut out and another image appeared, lines of what looked like chat messages, usernames, and dollar amounts. It disappeared before I could say anything. I looked at him and his face went pale. He muttered something and started typing fast on the laptop. Before I could even ask, blue and red lights flashed across the lot. At first, I thought maybe it was security or someone complaining about noise. But then more lights appeared. 3 police cars pulled in, blocking the exits. He froze completely. I started to panic, asking what was happening, and he told me to stay calm, that it was probably nothing. But his hands were shaking, and the laptop screen was filled with warnings and messages I couldn't understand. The officers got out shouting for him to step away from the car. He didn't move at first, then closed the laptop slowly and raised his hands. I remember sitting there frozen as they surrounded us. One officer came over to me and told me to step away from the car. He asked if I knew him. I said we just met. He looked at me like he'd heard that before. They started questioning him near the car while another officer opened the laptop. I saw one of them mutter something into his radio. Within minutes, another unmarked van pulled up. 2 people in plain clothes got out, looking straight at the laptop. They didn't treat it like some random arrest. It felt serious. I was asked to stand by one of the police cars while they talked to him. He kept saying it was a mistake, that he didn't know what was on the laptop, that he just used it for movies. But the officers weren't buying it. They started pulling cables out and checking his bag. One of them lifted a second hard drive wrapped in duct tape. The detective walked over to me and asked again how long I had known him, what I knew about his setup, and whether he'd mentioned anything about his work. I told him everything, even how the screen had glitched earlier. The detective sighed and said quietly that the laptop he was using had been reported stolen 2 months ago during a cybercrime investigation. He said it was connected to a group that had been using stolen devices to run scams and transfer money overseas. They said Joel wasn't just using it to watch movies. He'd been using it to mask illegal transfers during those screenings. The wireless setup was basically a disguise. He used the movie projection as cover to hide what the laptop was really doing. He probably didn't expect to get caught, but the system pinged its original owner's company when it went online that night. That's how they found him. They cuffed him right there, reek him his rights, and started packing up the projector and laptop as evidence. He looked at me once before they put him in the car, blank, no expression at all, like it wasn't even happening to him. They let me go after taking a statement, told me I wasn't in any trouble. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before driving home, still hearing the echo of the movie audio that had been playing seconds before the raid. A few days later, I read the article online. Man arrested after hosting illegal parking lot screenings linked to cyber theft investigation. It said police recovered stolen hardware containing data from hundreds of victims. I scrolled past his mugshot. It didn't even look like the same guy. I deleted Hinge that night, not because of him exactly, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how normal it all seemed. Just a guy with a projector and a passion for movies sitting in a parking lot. Turns out, the movie wasn't the only thing he was showing. She looked athletic, photos of her at hiking spots, wearing running gear, sunrise selfies at parks. Her bio said something about loving late-night adventures and running when the world was asleep. She messaged me first, asking if I liked running. I said yeah, sometimes. She replied instantly and said she was planning a midnight trail run that weekend and needed company. At first, I thought it was a joke. Who runs in a park at midnight? But she said it was peaceful, no people, no distractions. She promised it was safe, said she did it all the time. She even sent a picture of her usual trail, a long path cutting through woods, lit by small lamps that stayed on overnight. I wasn't sure if I should go, but she sounded confident, not like someone reckless. She said it'd be fun, that we could talk, maybe grab food after. Something about how casual she made it sound made me say yes. Saturday night came, and I drove to the park. It was one of those big ones just outside the city, the kind with cycling routes, picnic areas, and lawn paths that stretch into forested sections. By the time I got there, it was 11:45. The lot was empty except for one car, hers, I assumed, I texted her, and she popped up from behind a bench like she'd been waiting. She was dressed in a hoodie and shorts, running shoes tied tight, hair pulled back. She smiled, said I was right on time, and handed me a small flashlight, saying I'd need it once we left the lit section. I laughed nervously, thinking it was an exaggeration. The run started off fine. The first half-mile was along a lit path, quiet except for the sound of crickets and our footsteps. She kept a steady pace, talking easily about how she ran to clear her mind. But the further we went, the darker it got. The park lamps stopped, and trees closed in overhead. The only light came from our flashlights and a sliver of moon above. About 10 minutes in, she slowed down, glancing around like she was checking landmarks. I asked if she was okay, and she said she was just making sure we were close. That's when it hit me. We weren't running toward anything. We were circling deeper into the woods, away from the main trail. She stopped near a clearing where the ground dipped slightly. There was a patch of disturbed dirt, darker than the rest. She crouched down, shining her flashlight on it, and I saw the corner of a blue tarp peeking out. I froze. It didn't look like trash or gardening stuff. It looked like something hidden. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at it like she was debating what to do. Then she stood up quickly, brushed her hands on her shorts, and said she'd forgotten something important. She sounded shaky now. Before I could ask what that meant, I saw red and blue lights flicker faintly through the trees. Not near us, but close enough to reflect off the leaves. She went pale. I asked what was going on, but she didn't answer. Instead, she started walking fast back toward the trail, muttering under her breath. The lights got closer. Voices followed, police, shouting commands somewhere deeper in the park. I thought maybe there was a break-in or some patrol thing, but the look on her face said otherwise. She kept repeating that we had to leave. We got back to the main trail, and she started jogging again, faster now, but mine was racing. I asked her what that was back there, and she snapped that it was nothing, just something she'd left earlier. That's when I realized she hadn't been running that night just for fun. She'd come to check on whatever that stash was. Before we could reach the parking lot, more lights cut through the trees ahead. Police cars had pulled up at both exits, blocking the road. Officers with flashlights were sweeping the paths. One of them shouted for us to stop. Erin froze completely, then turned like she was about to bolt. They reached us in seconds. One officer asked who we were and what we were doing out there. I said we were just running, but they didn't look convinced. Another officer spoke into his radio, then walked over to Erin. He asked her name. She hesitated, then gave a fake one. It didn't matter. He already knew. He said her real name out loud, and her face dropped. They told her to empty her pockets and drop her bag. Inside were gloves, a folding knife, and a few small electronics, phones, a smartwatch, something that looked like a camera lens. She tried to explain it away, said she worked in tech repair and had picked them up earlier. They didn't buy it. One officer walked off with a radio, and another came back from the direction we'd come from. He said they'd found a buried bag in the clearing, stuffed with stolen goods. Laptops, jewelry, cash, all wrapped in tarps. The officer said they'd been tracking the stash for a week, waiting for whoever buried it to return. I just stood there, heart pounding, while they cuffed her. She didn't even look at me. She just stared at the ground, whispering something I couldn't hear. They questioned me after that, asking how I knew her, how I ended up there. I told them everything. How we met, how she invited me to run. One officer nodded, saying she'd been using dating apps as cover, meeting people so she didn't look suspicious coming to these spots alone. They said she'd been connected to a string of thefts, store robberies, stolen electronics from delivery trucks, all small but linked. She apparently used parks and trails to hide the stolen stuff until she could sell it later. When they finally let me go, I sat in my car, shaking. I could still see her through the windshields, sitting in the back of a police car, head down. The whole thing felt unreal. One minute I was on a casual run, the next I was part of a crime scene. A few days later, I read the article online. Woman arrested after buried stash of stolen goods found in local park. It mentioned her name, age, and the fact that she'd been caught after returning to the site with an unidentified companion. That was me. For a while, I kept replaying the night in my head. The dirt patch, the lights, her face when she saw them. Everything about her had seemed normal. Maybe even too normal. I deleted Hinge that same night. Not because I was scared, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how I had been invited on a run just to witness someone dig up their own crime. Every time I drive past that park now, I think about that dark trail, the flashlight beams, and the quiet sound of her footsteps before everything fell apart. His name was Mason, and his pictures fit the part. Smart jacket, gallery lighting, people in the background holding wine glasses. He had this quiet confidence, the kind that made everything he said sound important. His bio said he worked with small galleries around the city, helping organize shows for up-and-coming artists. I thought that was kind of cool, different from the usual guys who just said they liked hiking or cars. We started talking, and he had stories about everything. He talked about artists he'd met, pieces he helped restore, and how he was planning a show for a local gallery that weekend. He said it wasn't a huge event, but it was special because he'd been personally invited to curate some of the pieces. When he asked if I wanted to come with him, I said yes without thinking. It sounded like a chill first date, something creative, not just dinner and small talk. He told me to meet him at this small gallery tucked between caves downtown. When I got there, I saw people already gathering inside. The windows glowed with warm light, and I could see paintings on the walls, big splashes of color, abstract stuff, some portraits. He was waiting by the entrance, dressed like he worked there, greeting people and shaking hands. He smiled when he saw me, introduced me to a few people, artists or so he said, and handed me a drink. He seemed completely in his element, walking me around, explaining each painting like he'd memorized every detail. He talked about brush strokes, texture, composition. It all sounded convincing. I don't know much about art, but I could tell he practiced the words before. The gallery itself was beautiful. Clean white walls, soft music, little name cards beside each painting. Some people were taking pictures, others quietly discussing the work. It felt legitimate. I remember thinking it was impressive that he was part of something so organized. At one point, he pointed to a large painting of a woman sitting by the window. He said it was by a local painter who just started selling her work privately, and that this one could go for a few thousand easily. He said it like he was proud to have found it. The whole time, I thought he sounded passionate, not fake. After a while, I excused myself to go outside for some air. The place was getting crowded, and it was warm inside. I stepped out front, leaning against the railing, watching the streetlights flicker. That's when I heard shouting from inside. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew fast. A man's voice, angry and panicked. Then glass clinking, someone yelling for people to stop. I turned around, and through the window I saw the gallery owner, an older guy I'd seen earlier, storming toward the wall where the biggest paintings were hanging. He was holding a piece of paper and waving it around, yelling at two men who looked like security. I went back in, confused, and the whole room was tense. The owner was pointing at the paintings, shouting that they were fake. He said none of them matched the registration numbers from the artists. He was demanding to know who brought them in. Mason stood there frozen. People were staring at him. The owner pointed straight at him, yelling his name. He said Mason was the one who delivered the pieces earlier that week. Mason started stammering, saying it wasn't possible, that he'd gotten them from a verified contact. But the owner wasn't listening. He ripped one of the paintings off the wall and flipped it around, showing the back. There was no signature, no gallery stamp, nothing. Everything spiraled. One woman started crying, saying she just bought one of the smaller pieces for $500 cash. Another man shouted that he'd been promised authenticity certificates by the end of the night. It hit me then. Mason had been selling them. These weren't real paintings. Someone called the police. Mason tried to leave quietly, but the gallery owner blocked the exit. They started arguing, and Mason's calm, charming tone was gone. He looked terrified. He kept saying it was a mix-up, that his supplier had tricked him, that he didn't know they were forged. But no one believed him. By the time the police arrived, the gallery looked like a crime scene. Paintings leaned against walls, some with torn corners, others taken down completely. The officers started taking statements from everyone, and the owner handed them a stack of invoices with Mason's name on them. Each one listed the same seller name, someone who didn't exist. When they questioned him, he admitted he'd been helping organize pop-up shows for months, getting paintings from online sources and passing them off as originals. He said he thought they were real, but the more the police pressed him, the less sense his story made. They found receipts for transfers, photos of the pieces before they were framed, even messages arranging private deals with buyers. I sat in the corner, stunned. He fooled everyone. The owner, the buyers, the artists whose names he'd used. Even me sitting there thinking I was on a normal date with some passionate guy who cared about art. The police took him out in handcuffs while everyone watched. He didn't look back. The owner said later that half the paintings in the room were printed replicas from an online archive, cropped and restretched to look original. He even faked the signatures. They spent hours cataloging everything. When I finally left, the gallery lights were half off, and the floor was littered with glass from a broken frame. Outside, the night felt colder. I remember walking past the same spot where I'd been standing earlier, realizing how fast everything had flipped. The next morning, I read an article online. Fake art show shut down after police raid. It had his photo. It said he'd been running a small forgery scheme, using dating apps and social media to attract people to exclusive art events that didn't exist. He used crowds and fake charm to sell counterfeits, sometimes pocketing thousands before disappearing. The gallery that night had been his last attempt before someone finally caught on. I kept thinking about how confident he'd been walking through the room, explaining brushstrokes and history like he'd lived it. Every word had been rehearsed, every story borrowed from real artists he probably researched online. I deleted his number that morning. The messages were still there, all his fake charm written out like lines in a script. I deleted Hinge too, just sat there staring at my wall, thinking how easy it had been for him to make everything feel so real. When I pass that street now, the gallery's still there but closed most nights. The sign in the window says, "Under review." Sometimes I think about that wall of fake paintings and how, for a few hours, everyone in that room believed they were surrounded by art. Turns out, the only thing he ever really created was the lie. It started with a match that actually seemed fun for once. Her name was Kelly, and her profile stood out immediately. Bright, goofy photos, one of her leaning out of an ice cream truck window with a scoop in her hand. Her bio said she made people smile for a living. I thought she worked at a dessert shop or something. She had this lighthearted vibe, joking in every message, sending random memes, calling me Mr. Serious because I overthought everything. After a few days of talking, she said she wanted to do something different for our first date. She said her schedule was weird because of work, but she could pick me up in her office. I didn't get what she meant at first, but then she sent a photo, her standing in front of a pink and white ice cream van. I laughed and said, sure, why not? It sounded random but harmless. She said she'd pick me up around sunset, that we could grab a park spot, get some ice cream, and just hang out. I didn't think too hard about it. The van showed up right on time. It wasn't one of those creepy ones. It actually looked legit. It had colorful cartoon stickers, a big menu on the side, and music playing faintly from the speakers. She waved from the driver's seat, wearing a denim jacket and sunglasses even though the sun was going down. When I climbed in, the inside looked surprisingly tidy. The back had a freezer section, stacks of cones, boxes of toppings. Everything looked normal, except there was a metal cabinet bolted shut near the back. I figured it was just storage. We drove around for a while, talking about random stuff. She said she bought the van secondhand and did private events, sometimes selling at beaches or car boot fairs. She made it sound like this small, independent hustle that paid her bills. She handed me a cone, free of charge, and said it was employee perks. After about 20 minutes, she pulled into a quiet car park next to a lake. There were a few other cars around, but not many people. The sun had dipped low, and the air smelled like grass and petrol. We sat in the front, eating ice cream and laughing about childhood memories. She told me about weird customers, kids who try to pay in buttons or bottle caps. But she seemed distracted. Every few minutes, she checked her mirrors or glanced at her phone. Her tone changed a little, still smiling, but more forced. I asked if everything was fine, and she said she just didn't like being parked too long in one place. She said she had issues with competitors before. Then she froze mid-sentence. Through the mirror, I saw lights approaching, slow, steady, getting brighter. At first, I thought it was just another car pulling in, but then I noticed the blue and red flashing. 2 police cars rolled into the lot, one pulling up directly behind us. Her whole expression changed. She whispered something under her breath, grabbed her phone, and muttered that she needed to fix something. I asked what was going on, but she didn't answer. The officers got out, flashlights in hand, and started walking toward us. She tried to stay calm, leaning out the window and pretending to adjust the mirror. One officer tapped the side of the van and asked her to step out. She hesitated, then forced a laugh, saying they must have gotten the wrong person. They didn't laugh back. They asked her again to get out, and this time they opened the door themselves. I stayed in the seat, frozen, as they told her to move away from the vehicle. Another officer walked to the back and pointed his flashlight at the locked cabinet. That's when I realized something was really off. They asked for the keys. She started saying something about it being just extra supplies. But one of the officers pulled a small crowbar from his belt and popped the latch open. Inside were dozens of small boxes, unmarked, some with pharmacy stickers partially scratched off. They weren't ice cream supplies. They were prescription bottles, inhalers, sealed packs, even vials. The officer looked at her and asked if she knew what those were. She didn't answer this time. They moved fast after that. One of them radioed something in while another opened a larger cooler hidden under the freezer section. More boxes, painkillers, antidepressants, stuff with serial numbers and medical labels. She started panicking, saying she didn't know where they came from, that she'd just been holding them for someone. But the officers already had her in handcuffs. They pulled me out next, asked who I was. I explained everything, that it was our first date, that I thought she just sold ice cream. They believed me but still checked my ID and car. One of them said quietly that the van matched a description for an ongoing investigation. Someone had been using it to move stolen prescription drugs between cities. Apparently, she'd been working with a small group that raided supply vans parked behind pharmacies. They'd been selling the stolen meds on the side, using the ice cream truck as cover. The freezers were perfect for hiding sealed boxes under legitimate products. No one ever questioned an ice cream van parked near a neighborhood. They searched the whole vehicle for almost an hour. I stood off to the side, watching as they pulled out more hidden compartments. Every time I thought it was over, they found another stash. She stayed silent, just staring at the ground while they loaded everything into evidence boxes. One officer told me they'd been tracking her for weeks but couldn't catch her long enough to search the van. He said they got lucky that night. Someone had spotted her plates and called it in. I guess our date ended up being the perfect setup. When they finally drove her away, the music that had been playing earlier was still faintly looping through the speakers, this cheerful, tinny melody that sounded completely wrong now. They towed the van out of the lot, and I just stood there, holding the half-melted cone I never finished. The next day, I read about it online. Ice cream vendor arrested for distributing stolen prescription medication. The article said the van had been used to transport thousands of dollars worth of drugs across multiple towns. They mentioned she'd been posing as a local vendor to blend in. I didn't need to see the photo to know it was her. I deleted Hinge that morning, not out of fear, just disbelief. The whole thing felt unreal, like I'd accidentally wandered into someone else's movie. One second I was eating ice cream by a lake, and the next I was giving a police statement. Every summer since then, whenever I hear that tinny ice cream jingle echoing down a street, I can't help but picture that same pink van sitting under flashing lights, surrounded by police, melting cones on the dashboard. And his Hinge profile had that too cool to care vibe, grainy photos, vintage clothes. A caption that said, "I like weird spots and quiet chaos." When I matched with him, he messaged almost immediately saying dinner dates were overrated and that I should let him surprise me with something authentic. I asked what that meant, and he said he liked doing normal stuff but making it fun. He suggested we meet at a laundromat near his area. He said we could get coffee across the street, throw a load in, talk while we wait, and just see where it goes. I thought it sounded odd, but kind of cute in a hipster way. So Friday night, I showed up. It was one of those small laundromats tucked between a takeaway shop and a nail salon. The air smelled like detergent and warm fabric. I could hear machines humming even from outside. When I walked in, he was already there, leaning against a machine with 2 cups of coffee. He looked relaxed, chatting like we'd known each other for weeks. The place was quiet, except for a few people. An older man reading a paper, a couple folding clothes, and a woman watching her spin cycle. Dylan said he came there a lot because it was his thinking spot. He tossed a bag of clothes into one of the washers and said he liked multitasking. We talked for a while, and honestly, it wasn't bad. He was funny, had a weird charm, and didn't seem nervous at all. Every now and then, He glanced around like he was keeping track of the people inside, but I didn't think much of it. He said he liked people watching, that laundromats were little cross-sections of humanity. After about 15 minutes, I started noticing him doing small things that didn't fit. He kept wandering near other machines, checking them, pretending to look at the time on the screens. He glanced at the bags people left sitting nearby. At first, I assumed he was just restless, maybe bored. But then I saw him pick up someone else's laundry bag, open it slightly, and move it 2 machines down. I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe it was a prank or some kind of joke. But then he did it again, this time quicker, smoother, swapping the bag with another one from the opposite side of the room. He did it like he practiced. I wanted to ask what he was doing, but something about his focus made me stay quiet. He walked back to me smiling, acting normal. He started talking about music and films again, but his eyes kept darting toward the row of dryers. When one of them buzzed, the woman who'd been sitting near the corner stood up to check her clothes. She reached for her bag, frowned, then looked around. It wasn't there. She started whispering to the man next to her. Dylan pretended not to notice. I felt my stomach tighten. It was clear now he wasn't joking. He was switching people's stuff. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even want to accuse him outright, in case I was wrong. But I could see it, the nerves behind his fake calm. He sipped his coffee too fast, kept glancing toward the door like he was timing something. Then everything happened at once. 2 men came in, both wearing plain clothes. They didn't look like customers. One of them headed straight to the back, the other stopped by the counter. Dylan froze mid-sentence, eyes darting to the exit. The first guy pulled out a badge. He wasn't loud about it, but the energy in the room changed instantly. Everyone stopped folding, stopped moving. Dylan tried to act casual, but I could see his hand twitch toward his phone. The officer said something to him quietly, and his face went blank. The older man near the paper whispered to the woman that they'd been waiting weeks for someone matching Dylan's description. That's when I realized this wasn't random. They were undercover cops. They'd been watching a laundromat, waiting for whoever had been stealing wallets and small items from bags while people were distracted by their washing. The officer asked Dylan to stand up. He hesitated, then laughed like it was all a misunderstanding. But when the second officer came forward, Dylan's whole act fell apart. He started rambling, saying he was just checking the machines, and that I could vouch for him. The officer ignored him, reached into one of the nearby dryers, and pulled out a wallet wrapped in its shirt. Then another. Then another. They said they'd been tracking a series of petty thefts in multiple laundromats across the city, small crimes that added up fast. The thief would blend in, act friendly, talk to people, and move their stuff while their backs were turned. He'd stash what he took inside random loads until he could come back later to retrieve it. The officers emptied one of the machines and found several purses and wallets wedged behind the drum. Dylan's hands started shaking. He kept saying it wasn't his, that he didn't know how they got there. They told him to turn around. He didn't fight. They cuffed him right there, in front of everyone. The sound of the handcuffs clicking echoed louder than the dryers. People were whispering, watching, some pulling out their phones. I just stood there frozen, still holding my half-empty cup of coffee, not knowing if I should leave or stay. When the cops let him out, he looked straight at me once. Not angry, just hollow, like he'd already accepted it. Then he was gone, pushed into the back of an unmarked car parked outside. One of the officers stayed behind, explaining to the few of us who were still standing around. He said Dylan had been hitting the same locations for weeks. He'd used dating apps to meet people in the area, so he'd look less suspicious when hanging around. It made sense. If anyone noticed him loitering, he could just say he was on a date. The weirdest part was realizing how calculated it was. The way he picked that laundromat, how he distracted me with conversation right when he was moving bags. It wasn't impulsive, it was routine. When they finally cleared the place, I walked out into the cool air and just stood there for a minute. The buzz of the machines was gone, replaced by quiet. I kept thinking about how normal he'd seemed when we first matched, how his messages had been funny, harmless, how none of it felt fake until it suddenly was. Later that night, I read the report online. Laundromat thief arrested after undercover operation. The article said he'd stolen dozens of wallets and small electronics, targeting people who left their bags unattended. It mentioned that he'd been caught during a sting after being spotted multiple times on security footage switching laundry bags. I deleted his number right away. Then I deleted Hinge. Not because I was scared of dating apps, but because it hit me how easily you can walk into someone's setup without realizing it. One weird date idea, one quiet night, and suddenly you're sitting next to a guy being dragged out in cuffs. Every time I pass a laundromat now, I still think about that sound, a slow hum of the machines, the buzz when the cycle ends, and the exact second everything stops. It started like a summer cliche. Her name was Jenna, and her profile looked like something straight out of a movie: sunlight, sunglasses, pool floats, tan skin. Her bio said she lived for spontaneous nights in cold water. She had this easy confidence in her messages, the kind that made everything sound like an invitation. She said she didn't do boring dates and that she preferred meeting somewhere fun. When I asked where, she said her aunt's house had a pool, and she was hosting a small get together with a few friends. I thought it was kind of wild for a first date, but she was so casual about it that it didn't seem strange. She sent me the address, a big suburban home on the edge of town. She said her aunt was away and let her house sit sometimes, and that she liked having people over. I didn't question it. It wasn't like she said it was a crazy party or anything, just people, music, a pool. When I got there, I instantly noticed it wasn't small. There were at least 20 cars parked along the street. The sound of bass was thudding through the air, muffled by the gates. I texted her that I'd arrived, and she came out barefoot, holding a red cup, smiling like she owned the place. She looked exactly like her photos, tanned, glowing, confident. She pulled me inside, and it was chaos. The lights were dim, colored bulbs flickering over the pool. Music blasted from a speaker near the patio. People were everywhere, some swimming, some playing drinking games, others just hanging out by the grill. It didn't feel like a family home. It felt like a rental being pushed to its limits. I asked if her aunt was okay with this many people, and she laughed it off, saying her aunt was cool. She said she'd been doing this all summer, that it was her way of keeping things lively. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right, but I brushed it off. She took me to the kitchen to grab drinks. It looked lived in but not personal, like no one had been staying there properly. The fridge was half empty except for drinks and mixers. There were no signs of family photos or the kind of clutter you'd expect in someone's home. I figured maybe her aunt just traveled a lot. As the night went on, I started noticing small things that didn't fit. A neighbor peeking through the fence, shaking their head. A couple whispering near the sliding door about how they'd never seen her aunt once. Someone asked Jenna if the owner would mind them using the guest bedroom, and she told them it was fine, but the way she said it sounded forced, like she was guessing. Around midnight, things got louder. Someone set up fireworks near the pool, and a group of guys started jumping from the roof into the water. I was starting to feel uneasy. The place looked too expensive for that kind of chaos. I asked if she wanted to tone it down a bit, and she shrugged, saying the neighbors never complained. 10 minutes later, flashing lights reflected off the water. I thought it was part of the fireworks at first, until someone shouted that cops were outside. Music cut instantly. People started scattering, grabbing their stuff, running toward the gate. Jetta's smile disappeared. She whispered something about not expecting them tonight. That word, tonight, hit weird. The officers came through the side gate yelling for everyone to stay put. A few people froze near the pool while others tried to sneak out the back. One officer shouted for the music to stay off and asked who the homeowner was. No one answered. Jetta stayed quiet, pretending to be a guest. They started checking IDs, asking who organized it. When they got to her, she hesitated for a second too long. The officer asked again if this was her aunt's house. She nodded, saying her aunt was out of the country and she had permission to use it. They asked for her aunt's last name, and that's when she cracked. She said she didn't remember. The cops separated her from the crowd and started radioing in the address. A few minutes later, one officer said the owners were listed as a couple who'd been overseas for 3 months. They weren't her relatives. She didn't even know them. The story came out fast after that. She'd broken in weeks ago through a side window. She found the place empty, owners gone on holiday, and realized it was perfect for throwing parties. She started small, just a few people. Then word spread through social media. She made up the aunt story to explain how she had access. She'd been running it almost like a pop-up club, charging small entrance fees some nights, keeping it cash only so no one could trace it. The officers searched the house and found all sorts of stuff: hidden bottles, party supplies, broken furniture. The pool water was murky from overuse. The neighbors said they'd called the police multiple times over the past month, but every time the crowd left before the officers arrived. This time, someone had tipped them off early enough to catch her in the act. They arrested her right there, barefoot, mascara running, still trying to act calm. She kept saying it was harmless fun, that no one got hurt, that she was just keeping the place from feeling empty. But the damage was everywhere: broken tiles, stains, stolen decor. Everyone else was told to leave. I gave my statement outside, explaining how I'd met her. One officer shook his head, saying they'd been tracking reports of similar cases, people using dating apps to invite strangers to fake parties in houses they didn't own. It made it harder to trace, since everyone assumed someone else knew the host. When I left, the lights from the pool were still glowing, but the music was gone. The place looked completely different, quiet, heavy, dead. It didn't even look like a house someone lived in anymore, just a place that had been used up. The next morning, I read about it online. Woman arrested for hosting illegal parties in vacant property. The article mentioned the address and described how police found damage totaling over $20,000. They called it one of the wildest misuse of property cases in the area. They didn't use her real name, but the photo said enough. I deleted Hinge the same day, not because of her exactly, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how convincing she'd been. Every detail, the pool, the drinks, the confidence, felt real until it wasn't. Now every time I see a house lit up late at night, loud music spilling into the street, I can't help wondering who actually lives there, or if anyone does at all. His name was Nate, and his profile was all about exploring abandoned spots, forgotten tunnels, rooftop views. His photos were always at night, city lights behind him, or inside some empty warehouse. He called himself a finder of cool places. I thought it was harmless. He messaged me first, saying he had something unique planned if I was up for it. He said he wanted to show me something no one else had seen. He sounded confident, not sketchy. He said it wasn't dangerous, just quiet, and that we'd go before sunrise when it was empty. I thought it sounded weird, but also kind of thrilling. He said it used to be a hospital storage site that got shut down, and it had this creepy atmosphere he thought I'd like. I asked how he even found it, and he said he had connections. That should have been a red flag, but I was too curious. He picked me up around 4 in the morning. The city was still half asleep, and there was a fog hanging low over the streets. He drove toward the industrial side of town, past warehouses and empty lots. Eventually, we reached a chain-link gate with a faded sign that said, "No entry, property of City Health Services." He parked just outside it, killed the lights, and told me to follow. We climbed through a gap in the fence and walked across cracked concrete. The building looked like a block of shadows, tall and silent, with most of its windows boarded up. He had a flashlight and said the main door was already open from before. When we went in, the air changed. It was heavy, still, smelling like old paper and dust. The inside looked like an office that time forgot. Rusted filing cabinets, broken desks, stacks of papers everywhere. A flashlight beam caught old signs on the walls. Records storage, authorized access only. I asked what kind of records, but he just grinned and said I'd see. We went deeper down a hallway that stretched forever. The walls were stained, and old fluorescent lights hung loose from the ceiling. He seemed completely at home, stepping over fallen boxes like he'd been there 100 times. I followed, but something felt wrong. The deeper we went, the more organized everything looked. Folders neatly stacked on tables, boxes labeled by year. It wasn't random junk. It looked like someone had been maintaining it. He led me into a larger room, maybe an old archive office. The floors were covered in papers, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, scattered like snow. I picked one up, expecting old invoices or building reports, but it wasn't. It had names, dates, diagnoses. Each page was a patient file. Real ones, some even had photos clipped to them. I froze. He just laughed, saying it was cool, right? He started walking through them like it was nothing, kicking folders aside. I told him this didn't feel right, that it looked like private medical stuff, and he shrugged it off. He said the place had been closed for years and no one cared anymore. But the papers weren't that old. Some of the dates were just a few years ago. I could still smell ink on a few of them. One file had a case number that said, "Evidence hold." That's when it clicked. These were just hospital records. This place was still active, at least on paper. I told him we should leave. He ignored me and kept digging through a cabinet, pulling folders out like he was looking for something. He said he'd been trying to find a specific case. His voice dropped when he said it. I asked what he meant, and he muttered that it was about his dad. He said his dad's files were hidden here after a malpractice suit, and he wanted proof. It stopped being a date in that moment. It was clear he dragged me into something personal and illegal. I told him again we should go, but he waved me off. Then I noticed movement outside the cracked door. Flashlights. Multiple ones. Before I could say anything, loud voices filled the hallway. Someone shouted for us to stay where we were. He froze. A second later, uniformed officers came flooding into the room. They had city police patches, not security. One of them grabbed his arm and pulled him back while another told me to stand still. I tried explaining that I didn't even know where I was, that it was our first time meeting. They weren't surprised. One of them said quietly that this wasn't the first time someone had broken in. They'd been tracking repeated trespassing here for months. As they walked us out, I saw more clearly what this place was. The building wasn't abandoned. It was sealed. There were security tags on the doors, fresh locks on the rooms we passed. One officer told me the facility was being used by the city to store old medical evidence from unresolved cases. Everything inside was legally protected. The boxes of files, the photos, they were all tied to ongoing investigations. They said breaking in wasn't just trespassing. It was evidence tampering. He went quiet after that, didn't argue or deny anything. They separated us outside. I gave my statement while he sat on the ground in cuffs. The officer said they'd been trying to figure out how people kept getting in through the fence. Turns out, Nate had made it a hobby, sneaking into restricted buildings and bragging about it online. They found posts under his name showing parts of the same site, blurred and captioned with jokes about city secrets. He wasn't looking for his dad's file. That was just something he told strangers to make it sound meaningful. The cop said he'd been stealing files and photos, then trading them online to people obsessed with true crime archives. He even sold a few to private collectors. When they finally let me leave, the sky was starting to lighten. I sat in the car shaking, trying to process how casually I'd followed someone into a restricted government building because I thought it was just some quirky adventure. A few days later, I read an article online. Man arrested after breaking into sealed medical evidence facility. They found hundreds of stolen records at his apartment, patient photos, autopsy reports, even case summaries from investigations that never went public. The report said he'd been using dating apps to find people to take with him, to make it look less suspicious if he got caught. It wasn't just creepy, it was strategic. He picked people who wouldn't question it, who'd think it was some thrill-seeking date idea. I deleted Hinge that same day. Not because I was scared of dating again, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it was for him to make it sound normal. Exploring something cool turned into trespassing a government site surrounded by files with real people's names on them. Now, whenever I pass one of those faded buildings with boarded windows and warning signs, I keep walking. I don't care how cool it looks anymore. It started with her saying she loved history. Her name was Layla, and her Hinge profile was full of photos that looked straight out of a museum catalog. Old books, antique maps, sepia filters. Her bio said she worked for the city archives, helping preserve forgotten stories. It sounded kind of cool, honestly. Different from the usual jobs people brag about. She came across as smart, calm, and a little mysterious, which probably made her more interesting than she actually was. We talked for a bit before she mentioned that she sometimes gave private tours of the archives. She said most people didn't even know half the rooms existed. When she asked if I wanted to see a hidden section one night after work, I thought she was joking. I even asked if she was allowed to do that, and she said she'd done it before for friends. It didn't seem like a big deal. We met downtown near the municipal building where the archives were kept. The place looked boring from the outside. Gray stone walls, metal doors, fluorescent lights flickering behind tall windows. She met me by the side entrance, waving her staff badge like it was her golden ticket. The inside smelled like old paper and cleaning chemicals. The air felt thick still. The first floor was normal, rows of shelves, boxes labeled by decade, drawers full of maps. She told me this was the public access area where students and researchers came. Then she grinned and said the real stuff was below. We took a small elevator down to the basement level. It opened into a dim hallway with no windows. The floors creaked even though they were concrete. She used a key to open a side door that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The room inside was colder, smaller, and packed with tall shelving units. Some of the shelves were half empty, others stacked with thick books wrapped in plastic. She said this was the restricted section, records and materials not open to the public. She sounded proud showing it off, like she built it herself. She talked about how she loved the smell of old bindings and the sound of pages turning. It was the first time she looked completely alive, her voice echoing in that cold space. We walked deeper, past aisles that stretched longer than I expected. Every shelf was labeled with numbers and old handwriting. Some of the books had metal clasps, others were stored in locked cases. I asked if people actually came down here, and she said barely anyone. Only staff. That was what made it her favorite place. She stopped at a section marked Special Collection, Do Not Remove. She said she found something cool there last week, a book that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. She reached up and pulled out a thick volume wrapped in brown paper. She handled it gently, but with too much confidence, like she'd done it before. I remember feeling uneasy. The room didn't feel like a place for dating or exploring, it felt like a vault. She flipped the paper open, revealing an old leather cover with faint gold lettering. It looked centuries old. She said it was a medical ledger from the 1800s, filled with case notes and signatures from doctors who used to run local asylums. I asked if it was valuable, and she smirked. She said it depended who was asking. Then she took a picture of it with her phone, flipping through the pages quickly, muttering that she needed to record the serial marks. I didn't understand what she meant. After that, she started opening more books, taking quick photos, sometimes removing small identification cards from the covers. I asked what she was doing, and she said it was fine, that she was just cataloging them manually, but it didn't look like cataloging. It looked like scanning for information. The weirdest part came when she opened a box marked Recovered Property. Inside were 3 smaller books, each with a note attached. One said, Pending Legal Hold. She looked at them like they were treasure, whispering something about how rare they were. I stepped back, realizing this wasn't just curiosity. She was taking pictures of everything valuable. Before I could say anything else, we heard voices echoing down the hall. 2 men shouting something. Then the sound of heavy boots. Lala froze, eyes wide. She dropped her phone into her bag and grabbed my wrist, whispering that we had to go. We didn't make it far. The door at the end of the hallway burst open and 2 security officers came through, flashlights cutting across the room. One of them called her name, asking what she was doing down here after hours. She tried to play it off, saying she was showing a friend around. They didn't buy it. They asked what was in her bag. She said it was just her phone and keys, till when they asked her to open it, she hesitated. That was enough. One of them took it from her and started looking inside. They pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photo gallery, dozens of pictures of old books, catalog numbers, and internal documents. The officer radioed for backup while the other made us stay put. I tried to explain that I didn't know what was happening, that I thought she worked there legitimately. One of them said she did, but not anymore. Turns out she'd been under quiet investigation for months. The city noticed missing items from the restricted archive, rare ledgers, manuscripts, even small pieces of artwork stored for preservation. They couldn't figure out who was taking them because nothing ever showed up missing on the daily logs. Everything looked normal. But someone had been scanning internal records, cataloging item details, and selling them online to collectors who wanted rare local history items. She was the one leaking them. She'd been using her access to identify valuable pieces and passing the info to buyers. Some items were never recovered. The police had been monitoring her activity, waiting to catch her in the act. That night, she made it easy. They arrested her right there, handcuffing her next to the shelves she'd called her favorite. The officers said she'd been sneaking down after hours for weeks, using her old access codes even after she'd been suspended. She probably thought no one was watching. They took statements from both of us, and one officer told me I was lucky I hadn't touched anything. If I had, I could have been charged too. They said she'd used dating apps before to make herself seem normal, to blend in while she ran her side business. Meeting people through apps made her look less suspicious when she wandered around late at night. They escorted me out of the building while they searched her bag. I remember the elevator ride up feeling endless. The normal first floor looked so bright and harmless compared to what was below. A few days later, I read the article. City archive worker arrested for selling historical materials. They traced thousands of dollars worth of stolen books to her, most sold under fake accounts. The story said she'd started small, selling duplicates, then moved on to originals once she realized how much people were willing to pay. I deleted Hinge that morning. The whole thing made me feel sick. Not because of what happened, but because of how ordinary it all started. A smart girl who loved history offering a private tour of her workplace. It didn't sound criminal. Now every time I walk past that municipal building, I look at those gray walls and wonder how many of those rooms still hold things no one is supposed to see. It started like a normal match. His name was Aaron, and his profile looked clean, simple photos, no filters, a bio that said he owned a small cafe downtown. He talked about how proud he was of running his own place, how he liked coffee more than people, how he wanted to meet someone who understood hard work. He sounded like every guy trying to seem grounded. He messaged first, said we should grab brunch at his cafe. He said it was quiet on weekdays and he'd make sure we got the best table. I figured it was safe. Public place, A-time, his workplace. He seemed organized, polite, nothing strange. The cafe was small but nice. It sat on the corner of a narrow street lined with bakeries and thrift shops. The sign above the door was hand-painted, the kind that looked like it belonged in an old movie. When I walked in, he was already behind the counter, laughing with a barista. He waved me over, all smiles, wearing an apron and holding a menu. The smell of roasted coffee and butter hung in the air. The morning light at the front windows just right. He led me to a booth near the back, handed me a coffee, and said I had to try the French toast. It was the thing they were known for. He insisted on ordering for both of us, saying it was part of the full Aaron experience. I laughed, thinking it was just his version of charm. He disappeared into the back to check on the order, leaving me alone. I scrolled through my phone, half watching people come in and out. The place was calm. Soft chatter, cups clinking, that low hum you get in cozy cafes. Nothing about it felt wrong. He came back for a bit, sat down across from me, talking about business. He said owning a cafe was hard work, that everything from rent to maintenance was a headache. He joked about how small accidents could ruin everything. I thought he was just venting about stress. He didn't sound upset, just tired. Then he got a phone call. He looked at the screen, frowned, and stood up, saying he'd be right back. I watched him walk toward the back again, past the counter and through the kitchen door. I remember checking the time, thinking it had been almost 15 minutes since he'd gone. The waiter brought our plates over, saying Aaron had asked them to start without him. I took a bite, trying to play it cool, but something felt off. The air changed first. That's the only way I can describe it. The smell of syrup and coffee shifted into something sharper and metallic. I thought maybe someone had burned something on the stove. Then I heard it, a quick, muffled pop from behind the counter, followed by a hiss. People looked around. A second later, one of the workers shouted something and ran toward the back. Then came the explosion. Not huge like in movies, but loud enough to shake the floor. The lights flickered, and thick smoke started pouring out from the kitchen door. People screamed, chairs scraped, glass shattered. I ducked down as the fire alarm blared overhead. The staff rushed to evacuate everyone. I stumbled out into the street with a crowd of customers, coughing, watching the smoke rise through the oven door. Flames were visible now, curling around the kitchen doorway. Someone called emergency services, and within minutes, fire trucks were pulling up. I kept looking for Aaron. He was nowhere. The fire was under control within half an hour. The firefighters moved fast, blocking off the street, spraying foam through the windows. The building wasn't completely gone, but the back section was destroyed. I sat on the curb, shaking, holding my phone like it would explain what just happened. When the police started asking questions, I told them everything. They asked when I'd last seen Aaron, what he said, what he did. When I said he went to the back after taking the call, their faces changed. One of them radioed something in. They found him, but not in the cafe. He was 2 blocks away, standing in an alley, watching the smoke. Someone recognized him and pointed him out to the officers. They walked over quietly, talked to him for a few minutes, then cuffed him. He didn't fight it. He looked calm, almost relieved. I later found out the fire wasn't an accident. Investigators said it started behind the kitchen, near the gas lines and cleaning supplies. It was deliberate. They found traces of accelerant on the floor and burnt wires rigged near the outlet. It wasn't a random spark. It was planned. Aaron hadn't just owned the cafe. He'd been drowning in debt. The business wasn't making money, and the landlord was threatening eviction. He'd taken out multiple insurance policies, one of them finalized to just a week before our date. The call he got before leaving the table. It was from someone helping him set it up. The plan was to start a small fire in the back, make it look like a kitchen accident, and collect the insurance payout before closing permanently. He didn't expect it to go off so quickly, or with people still inside. The worst part was realizing he'd brought me there as part of the cover. A customer at the scene made the fire seem accidental, like business as usual. If everything had gone smoothly, I would just been a random diner giving a statement about a tragic kitchen accident. He even ordered my food to make sure I stayed seated while he went to set things up. They charged him with arson, reckless endangerment, and insurance fraud. No one died, but 2 staff members got minor burns trying to put it out. He never showed an ounce of guilt. The report said he'd been planning it for weeks, testing different nights to see when it was busiest enough to look real, but not packed enough to draw major casualties. A few days later, I read the full story online. Local cafe owner arrested after fire investigation. They mentioned witnesses' damage estimates and the fact that the fire was timed with an insurance renewal. It didn't mention me, but reading it felt strange. I kept thinking about how normal he'd looked, how casually he'd laughed before walking away. Now, whenever someone suggests meeting in a cafe for a first date, I think twice. It's stupid, but every sound, a coffee grinder, a plate dropping, even the smell of something burnt, makes my chest tighten. I guess what gets me the most is how calm he was. Like he'd already planned every second. He wasn't nervous or suspicious. He knew exactly when to leave, exactly when it would happen. And I was just there, part of the background. It still feels unreal sometimes, like it was all staged. She messaged me first, which almost never happens. She said she liked that I seemed normal, not too online. We talked for a couple of days, just easy conversation. She said she wasn't into clubbing or movies. She preferred nights where the world feels asleep. When I asked what she meant, she said she'd show me if I was free that weekend. She suggested meeting near an old bridge outside town. She said the view was great, that you could see the whole river light up from the lamps on the water. She wanted to go late, like around midnight, because it was quiet and no one else would be around. It sounded weird, but not too weird. I figured maybe she was just into photography or stargazing or something like that. I got there early. The bridge wasn't far from the main road, but once you stepped onto it, the noise dropped completely. Just water below, a few crickets, the soft hum of distant cars. It was dark, except for a couple of flickering streetlights. I leaned against the railing, waiting, scrolling through our messages again. Everything she'd said sounded normal. Then a car pulled up on the dirt road beside the bridge, a small silver one. Headlights stayed on for a second before switching off. She stepped out wearing a dark hoodie, her hair tied back. She waved, smiling like we'd known each other for ages. She had that kind of calm voice that makes you lower yours without realizing. We started walking along the bridge. She pointed at the lights reflecting in the water, said it looked peaceful. She asked about my family, where I live, what I did for work. Her questions came fast, but never felt random. I remember thinking she was observant, like she paid attention to small details. We stopped in the middle, leaning on the railing. The air felt colder than before. I noticed she kept glancing at her phone like she was waiting for a message. I joked that she had somewhere better to be, but she said no, she was just keeping track of time. Then she asked if I'd ever been filmed without realizing it. The question came out of nowhere. I laughed awkwardly and said probably not, but she didn't laugh back. She stared down at the water, saying some people like capturing moments that feel too real. Her tone was different now, flat, distracted. She stepped away and walked toward the end of the bridge, glancing over her shoulder like she wanted me to follow. I hesitated but went after her. That's when I noticed something. On the other side of the bridge, parked halfway in the shadows, another car. The engine wasn't running, but I could see a faint glow from inside. She stopped and leaned on the railing again, this time closer to that side. Her phone buzzed, and she turned slightly, typing something quick. I asked if she was texting someone to join, and she said no, just her friend making sure she was safe. I didn't believe it. Her eyes kept darting toward the car. The quiet suddenly felt heavy, the kind of quiet where every sound stands out. I could hear footsteps echoing faintly from the other end of the bridge. Someone was walking toward us, slow, steady. Before I could say anything, the sound of tires screeching cut through everything. Blue and red lights flashed at the far end. Police. Multiple cars. Within seconds, the silence exploded into chaos. Officers got out shouting commands, flashlights sweeping across the bridge. Tessa froze. Her face trained completely. I stepped back, confused, as they started running toward us. They yelled for her to drop her phone. One of them shouted her full name. She didn't move. Two officers grabbed her and pulled her back while another aimed a flashlight at the car in the shadows. The doors opened, and a man got out with his hands up. The officers cuffed him immediately. I stood there frozen, trying to process what was happening. They asked if I was okay, told me to step aside. One officer pulled me toward the police car while the others searched the bridge. They took her phone, her bag, and even went through the railing area with flashlights. I asked what was going on, but no one said much at first. Later, one officer told me quietly that they've been tracking her for weeks. She wasn't just some random girl from a dating app. She was part of a group that used dating profiles to lure people to isolated places, bridges, parks, empty roads, then filmed them secretly. The videos were sold online through private sites, labeled as real encounters. They made it look like random dates gone wrong, sometimes even staging fake scares or setups. But a few cases had escalated. People had been hurt. The man in the car was her partner. He was the one running the camera setups. They'd been meeting victims through apps, tricking them into going somewhere quiet, then recording them. Sometimes it was just for shock content, but other times it turned violent. The bridge wasn't random either. Police said it was the same location where two other missing date reports had started. They'd been staking it out after tracking her messages with a fake account. I just happened to match with her before they pulled the trigger on the sting. When they showed me her phone later, it made my stomach drop. There were dozens of videos, people walking toward her in the dark, unaware. Some of them showed her talking sweetly and signaling toward a hidden camera. Others showed strangers standing confused, like I had been looking around while someone filmed from the distance. They took my statement, kept asking if I'd noticed anyone else around. I told them about the car, about how calm she'd been until the lights showed up. They nodded, saying that matched her usual pattern: stay composed, keep the victims still until they were surrounded. The whole thing ended with flashing lights reflecting off the water, or sitting cuffed on the curb, staring blankly ahead. The officer said she'd probably get charged for unlawful surveillance, fraud, and possibly worse once the full footage was reviewed. When they finally let me go, I sat in my car for nearly an hour. The bridge looked different now. Cold, empty, with police tape fluttering in the wind. I read through her messages again, the compliments, the jokes, the way she talked about quiet places. It all sounded so normal. The next day, I saw the story online. Couple arrested for filming dating app victims for dark web content. The article blurred her photo, but I knew it was her. It mentioned at least 5 confirmed victims and more videos under investigation. They'd been making thousands of dollars selling the recordings. It still messes with me that I was supposed to be one of them. I think about that night a lot. How she smiled, how she checked her phone, how I didn't realize the sound of footsteps behind us wasn't random. Now when someone mentions meeting somewhere quiet or late at night, I just say no. The bridge cured me of all that. We matched on a Tuesday. He said he worked from home testing software for smart devices. His messages were short, funny, and kind of dry. He said he liked to keep things efficient. It fit the tech guy vibe. By Thursday, he asked if I wanted to see his place that weekend. He said he'd cook and I could test out the smart home setup. It sounded cool. I'd never been to one before. Saturday night, I drove to the address he sent. It was a new housing estate on the edge of town. The kind where every house looked identical: flat gray walls, black fences, small front gardens. His stood out because it had bright blue lights lining the path, glowing softly like something out of a sci-fi movie. The front door opened before I even knocked. His voice came from a speaker somewhere above me, saying, "Come in." I laughed awkwardly and stepped inside. Everything was spotless. The lights dimmed automatically as I walked in, and some soft jazz started playing from invisible speakers. He came out of the kitchen holding 2 glasses of wine and smiled like this was just another night for him. He told me to look around while he finished dinner. Every room had voice controls, smart bulbs, cameras tucked into corners. The TV turned on when I looked at it too long. The blinds shifted by themselves when I walked past. It was impressive, but also strange. There was no warmth to it, no photos, no clutter, nothing that showed someone actually lived there. Even the smell was artificial, like an air freshener set to go off every 10 minutes. When we sat down to eat, he started talking about his work. He said he tested new systems that made homes predict human behavior. I joked about how creepy that sounded, but he said the future was convenience. He explained how his whole house could monitor body movement, detect temperature shifts, even track emotional responses from facial cues. I noticed small black dots along the walls, tiny cameras, all angled slightly down. I asked if he really needed that many, and he said they were data nodes. He said he disconnected them from the cloud since he was testing offline performance. That part stuck with me later. The lights changed color as we ate, fading from soft blue to amber. It almost felt like the house was breathing with us. I asked how long he'd lived there, and he said a few months, though the place looked untouched. Halfway through dinner, he excused himself to get dessert from the kitchen. I sat alone for a few minutes scrolling my phone. Then I noticed my signal drop. Full bars to 0. I tried the Wi-Fi. Nothing. I looked around, wondering if it was the walls. Then I heard a voice, not his, but the same tone that greeted me earlier. The speaker said, "Door locked." I thought it was automatic. Maybe it did that at night. But when I got up to check, the front door handle didn't move. I pressed the button beside it. Nothing. I called out to him, but he didn't answer. I could hear faint clinking from the kitchen, so I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was just his setup. I told myself I was overreacting. Then the music stopped. All the lights turned red. Every room at once. I froze, holding my phone like it would help. The voice came back again, calm as ever. Motion detected. I turned toward the living room camera. Its small light blinked twice. I could feel it tracking me. Mark walked back in a few seconds later, holding 2 bowls of ice cream, acting like nothing was wrong. He looked confused when he saw my face, then smiled and said the system probably glitched. He walked over to the wall and tapped a panel, turning the lights back to normal. He sat down, still calm, still talking like it was fine. I wanted to leave, but it felt awkward to say so after just one weird moment. So I forced myself to stay a bit longer. The air felt heavy, though. Every time I looked around, one of the small cameras seemed to twitch slightly. Then came the banging. Loud, sharp, echoing through the house. Someone was shouting outside, followed by another hit, harder this time. The voice yelled, "Open up. Police." Mark's face dropped. He stood up so fast his chair hit the floor. I didn't move. He looked at me, then at the door, and his hands started shaking. The speaker system repeated, "Door locked." He ran toward the panel on the wall, hitting buttons that didn't respond. The banging got louder. A crash followed, like they were forcing it open. The alarm blared once before the front door burst inward. 3 officers stormed in, guns drawn. It told me to get down. I dropped beside the table, my hands up, completely lost. They shouted at him to freeze. He tried saying something about a misunderstanding, but they didn't listen. They cuffed him on the floor while one of them guided me outside. The cold air hit hard after being in that place. More police cars were parked out front, red and blue lights reflecting off the clean walls. An officer pulled me aside and asked how I knew him. I explained about Hinge, the dinner, the smart home. They told me to stay where I was. Later, I overheard one of them saying they tracked a missing person's phone signal to that exact house. A woman who'd gone missing 2 weeks earlier after matching with someone on a dating app. Her phone pinged from inside his home multiple times, then stopped transmitting. They'd gotten a warrant to search the property. They found it in the basement, a small locked storage room behind a false wall, hidden behind one of those data nodes. The officer didn't tell me details, just that the phone was buried under piles of wires and equipment. He said they were investigating what else had been recorded in that house. They took Mark away that night. The news broke 2 days later. Tech consultant arrested after police traced missing woman's signal to smart home. They mentioned several devices configured for off-grid recording and one encrypted drive full of video files. No one said what was on them. I keep thinking about the red lights, the voice saying motion detected, and the way the door locked by itself. It wasn't just a glitch. It was programmed that way. Sometimes when my own phone disconnects for a second, my stomach still tightens. I think about how easily someone can build something that looks smart, safe, impressive, and turn it into a cage.